So this is a talk I gave to the ladies of Kilfennan Presbyterian Women on the 14th of January 2020 on certain aspects of the city walls and also some thoughts on restoration, which was their theme for the year, and two important Presbyterian women from the city. So the programme for Presbyterian women for the 2019-20 year was restoration and focusing on Psalm 23 verse 3, He restores my soul. And that was the programme of the different speakers throughout the year, and you can see my talk was about halfway through. The first section of my talk was very much introducing myself as a member of the congregation and showing a few slides about my business, Derry Danders Walking Tours. At that point, I also showed a video, approximately 2.5 minutes long, a promotional video about Derry Danders, and that's available on YouTube as well if you want to have a look at that now. Hello, my name is David, and I run a walking tour business in Derry, Londonderry called Derry Danders Walking Tours. I encourage visitors to linger longer in Londonderry and enjoy a dander around Derry. My profession as an accountant has allowed me to travel extensively in Europe, and in particular in Spain, France and Sweden. I always try to learn about the local culture and history of the cities that I have visited, and a walking tour from a local guide has always been a must-do experience. From my own personal experiences as a tourist, I have learned what makes a good walking tour, and I hope to deliver this as I convey to my clients the rich history of my home city and county of Derry, Londonderry. My mission is to provide informative and entertaining historical tours, and I always strive to be politically neutral and historically accurate. Due to the wealth of historical information that exists about the city, the biggest challenge has not been what to include, but what to leave out. I was born, bred, and am a lifetime resident of the city. I am a passionate student and reader of history. I am a member of Visit Derry, the local tourist organisation, Tour Guides NI, and as such am public liability insured. I am also a long-time member of the Friends of the Derry Walls and other local historical societies. I am steadily developing my contacts with other tourist organisations and attractions and work as part of a connected and collaborative network for the benefit of visitors to the area. I am currently able to offer a number of add-on visits to attractions in this area, including the Guildhall, St Columb's Cathedral, the Playhouse and the St Columba Heritage Centre. I have also developed a young person's treasure hunt to keep the younger visitor engaged during my tours around the Derry walls. I invite you on my tours, which can be customised for you. See you in Derry, Londonderry soon. As part of my tours, I sometimes ask my guests if they could say one word to describe the city, what would it be? Now, usually I used to get wet, cold, windy, rain, but that's not really the words I'm looking for. So these are 4 words that I think could describe a lot about the city. Bridges. We currently have 3 bridges in the city, but we've only had 5 in the whole of the city's history, the first one arriving in 1790. Given that we have been a centre of inhabitation for thousands of years, it was quite late before we got our first wooden bridge in 1790. Then we got the Carlisle Bridge, which was an iron bridge in the 1800s, followed by the Craigavon Bridge in the 1920s, followed by the Foyle Bridge in the 1980s, and then the Peace Bridge in 2011, which just coincided well with the forthcoming year City of Culture in 2013. Cannons. Around the city walls we have a number of cannons. Most of them are British iron cannons, but there are also two Spanish bronze cannons in the Tower Museum, and there's one Russian cannon over at outside All Saints Church in the Waterside. Sieges. We have had at least 3 sieges in the city's history, but maybe 7 if you've listened to my other talks. But most people only recall the Great Siege of 1688 to 89. And walls. We have 2 tourist landmarks. We have the main city walls, and I'll be talking about them in a few seconds' time. And we also have Free Derry Wall, which is very significant from the time of the Troubles. So I call this the city walls W5, the who, what, where, when, why, etc. And there's a map giving you a bit of information about the city walls. And we're going to go for a bit of a walk around, starting from Magazine Street up until we reach St Columb's Cathedral. So who built the walls? Well, the walls were built by the London companies or guilds at the cost of approximately £11,000 back in those days, which is the equivalent of about 60 million today. What were the walls made of? Well, most of them is surrounded by a local stone called schist, but inside the walls there's just a lot of building rubble and earth. The actual stone is actually a relatively small part of the walls. Where are the walls? Well, the walls were built around part of the hill or island of Dura or Derry, as it was originally known. It's not exactly on the hill itself. It sort of starts at the bottom and goes halfway, reaches the summit of the hill, but doesn't go down the other side. And I'll give you a bit of a reason for that in a few seconds. When? Well, it was built between 1613 and 1619. It was probably finished in December 1618, but it was signed off by Nicholas Pienaar, the surveyor for the British government, in March 1619. And why? Well, the most obvious one is as a defensive fortification. And as we said, there have already been 3 sieges in the walls, and I would suggest that those are 1641-42, 1649, and 1688-89. But it was also built for commercial purposes. The people that built the walls were merchants, and if you were building it just for fortification purposes, you'd have started halfway down Bishop Street without, and probably finished halfway down Shipgate Street. But because the merchants wanted to get access to the port, they extended it down so that basically where Shipgate Gate is was very close to the quay where the ships came in. So commercial reasons changed a lot of what the walls looked like. And just draw attention to some words from the book of Nehemiah in the Old Testament. Nehemiah, known as the smallest man in the Bible, Nehemiah. But seriously, if you just think about some of the things that are maybe similar to the building of the Derry walls, he arrived back in Jerusalem, or he'd heard that the walls had been broken down, and he wept. And that was probably similar to the case in 1608, where the original earthen walls that had been built by Docra had been destroyed when Cathal O'Doherty um, destroyed the city again. Then in chapter 2, he goes out and he inspects Jerusalem's walls and gets a plan as to what was done. And that's probably a bit similar to the guys from the London companies who went out and surveyed the ground. The two men most known for that is a guy called John Smithies and also Matthias Springham, who was a merchant tailor and who then went on to form the Free School, or what then became Foyle College. In the 4th chapter, Nehemiah talks about doing the work, where they built basically with one hand and they kept a sword on the other hand because of attacks from people there. And that was probably a bit similar to the planters who at any stage could have been attacked by the native Irish, who were probably a bit put out by losing their land. And there's a few comparisons between the walls of Londonderry and the walls of Jerusalem. Obviously many thousands of miles apart. Derry's walls are only 1 mile in circumference, whereas Jerusalem's are about 2.5 miles. Derry's walls were built between 1613 and 1619, but there have been at least 3 versions of Jerusalem's walls. We have 7 gates, although originally there were only 4, whereas Jerusalem would have 9 gates. And we currently have only 2 watchtowers, but there may at one stage have been up to 10, though there are 34 watchtowers in Jerusalem's walls, and bastions. And bastions are fortified areas that jut out from the walls to increase the line of fire of cannon. And we currently have 7, but originally there would have been up to 10, was Jerusalem's walls do not have any bastions. So now we're going to start our virtual tour of part of the city walls. And here we are standing in the centre of Shipgate Place, or what a lot of locals simply call Guildhall Square. And I think it's quite a convenient place to meet my guests, especially if they're from out of the city, because it's an easy place to find. So where we would actually be standing now, we would actually be in the river or on a wooden quay that came up to the walls up to maybe 200 years ago, until the city spread out on reclaimed land away from the walls. The city's name comes from the Irish for oak grove, and it really was an island in the middle of the Foyle that was surrounded by water on 3 sides, and possibly 4th at certain times when there was high tide. And the 4th side tended to stay as a bog or a swamp, so it became known as the bog side, and that is still the west of the city, which is known as the bog side today. Although there were probably inhabitations much before that, and there have been archaeological digs in Mount Sandal and Thornhill, we really class the beginning of the city's history to when St. Columba established his monastery there in 542 AD. The city became really an ecclesiastical capital of the area, was the like of Greenan Fort, or the Iliac of Greenan, was the political capital for the lords of the area. In 783, the Vikings came to town and burnt down the monastery. And there was a battle at a place called Caw, and Caw is Irish for battle, and that is how Caw got its name. But the Irish lords at the time were successful, and basically the Vikings didn't have any able to establish a foothold here, unlike what they did in Dublin, where they established the city of Dublin and Waterford and other cities throughout Ireland. So The Normans came to Ireland in 1169. Most people know that they came to England in 1066, but they came here in 1169 and they came by invitation. King Dermot of Leinster had really been kicked out of his throne. He saw that the Normans had a strong army under Henry II in England, so he went across to him and asked him to come over. And eventually he did, or he sent a Welsh lord called Strongbow. Strongbow married King Dermot's daughter, and that brought the English really, or at that time they were more French rather than English, but that brought them to Ireland. And the area around the city became part of the domain of the de Burgh family. But I would only say it was very much a nominal control, because the Gaelic lords of Ulster, basically the High Kings usually were the O'Neills, and the O'Donnells controlled a lot of uh, Donegal, and the O'Dohertys would have controlled closer to the city itself. They really were in control, so it's only very much a nominal thing. But the de Burghs built a castle at Greencastle, and the ruins of it are still there. The first English garrison arrived in 1567, but this wasn't really successful. Um, there was a lot of confrontation. They didn't like the weather. I think a lot of them got sick with the flu. And it's also known for the fact that there was a cathedral or large church in Derry known as the Temple Moor. And it's believed the garrison either deliberately destroyed it or stored their gunpowder in it, and that it was destroyed. However, in 1600, a second English garrison came under Henry Dockwra, and that was a much more successful escapade. He brought about 4,000 troops, and instead of having to go through the middle of Ulster to get there, he was able to get in by ship because he had done a deal with the Lord of Greencastle at that time, Cathal O'Doherty. The first city was really built by Dockwra, and it got its charter. At that time, it was spelt a number of ways, but the understanding is it was spelled Derry with the IE. I've also seen it spelled with DERRYE as well. Unfortunately, in 1608, Cathal O'Doherty destroys the city. Though he was very friendly with Dockwra, he didn't like the guy that succeeded Dockwra, Paulet. He apparently insulted him. So therefore, he attacked the city, and the city was destroyed. But at that time, it only had earthen walls, and they knew that to maintain the city, they would have to build a much stronger structure. And then that coincided with the plantation of Ulster, with English and Scottish lords who were going to be given a lot of the land of Ulster, and the county of Londonderry, or what was then known as County Coleraine, was given to the English companies, and they really established the city. And in 1613, the city got its second charter. It was known as Londonderry, as it did already said. The county of Coleraine then became County Londonderry, and the walls were started in 1613. So I usually say to my guests, then take a look now at this large building in front of you. And a lot of people from out of town simply think it's some sort of cathedral. So the very first Guildhall built here was in 1887. Now, I should clarify that it wasn't the first city hall or town hall. That was originally located from the 1600s up where the Diamond is and where the War Memorial is now. But after a fire in the 1860s, they decided to relocate the Guildhall down to the extra bit of land that they had reclaimed in front of the walls. In 1908, the first Guildhall was largely destroyed by fire. It was hardly happened on Easter Sunday, and most of the population came out because it was a bit of a slow burner, and they were able to get out most of the stuff of treasures, values, stuff out of the Guildhall. But it really burnt the section you see on the left. The clock tower remains of the original Guildhall. Although we had a fire brigade in the city, it was apparently out in Carndona that day putting out another fire, and by the time it arrived back, the Guildhall was lost. So it was reopened again in 1912, and in 1972 it was bombed by the IRA and reopened again in 1978. It contains on the first floor the council chambers, and at the rear of the ground floor the mayor's parlour. Also in the first floor is the main hall, where we have one of the largest pipe organs anywhere in Ireland, and we also have some very beautiful stained glass windows, some of which tell the history of the city from the time of Columba up to after the siege of Derry. On the ground floor there's a plantation of Ulster exhibition, and it's very much worth going to. It's free to visit, and it tells the story not just from that of the planters, but also from the native Irish who were disadvantaged after the plantation. Then I would get my guests to turn backwards and walk over to the wall itself and point them out the plaque remembering the Mountjoy which broke the boom in July 1689 and commemorates Michael Browning, its captain, who was unfortunately killed. And I would give my guests just a very quick summary of the siege. I always tell them it was part of a war between a Protestant king and a Roman Catholic king. I always want to distinguish that it wasn't a war between Protestants and Catholics, because there was both religions on both sides. It was between a Protestant king and a Catholic king. It really began in December 1688 when 13 apprentice boys closed the gates. The first gate they closed, Ferrigy Gate, then Bishop Gate, then Butcher's Gate, and then Shipgate Gate, in that order. And remember, at the time of that siege, as was the time the walls were built, there were only 4 gates on the walls at that time. The siege proper didn't really begin until March 1689, where King James arrived at Bishopsgate. Now, he probably only came to about 200 yards, and he asked the city to surrender. And apparently, the very first time the cry of "No surrender" was heard was when it was shouted out to King James from Bishopsgate. The siege lasted 105 days, and in July 1689, when the Mountjoy broke the boom, the people were saved, and that was known as the Relief of Derry. And the modern day apprentice boys parade twice a year in December and July to remember both the shutting of the gates and also the Relief of Derry. Now, I've only given you a very quick pointer about the siege. There's so much more I would be telling as we walk around the walls. So now we're going to walk over and take a look at Magazine Gate. Now, Magazine Gate is not one of the original 4 gates. It was built in the mid-1800s to facilitate commerce coming in and out of the city when the city extended itself from its original walls. But I would draw your attention to the city's coat of arms. You can see it quite clearly on that particular gate and scattered around the walls at different places. And just if you see the top section of the coat of arms, you see the cross of St. George and you see the sword of St. Paul. And that is the coat of arms of the City of London. In reality, if you go to the modern day London, you have a number of cities grouped together, including Westminster, but that would be almost the financial district, the city of London itself. And the bottom section where you see the tower or castle and the skeleton, that represents Derry. So there's the London and Derry. Now, how does the skeleton represent Derry? Well, that's because that was the coat of arms of the de Burgh family, and they were the nominal lords of the area. And the story goes the 2 brothers fell out with each other when they were seeking to get the inheritance and one put the other into the cellar and starved him to death. And he was known as Walter. And sometimes in Halloween, you see a few people dressed as skeletons around the city, and they still look like complete wallies to this day. But uh, that was the city of coat of arms from the 1640s. Some people think the skeleton represents the siege, but no, that predated the siege by about 50 years. And the Latin Vita Veritas Victoria means life, truth, and victory. So just before we go onto the walls, we're going to have a look through, and we see a structure known as the Tower Museum. And that's the city's main uh, museum, and very much worth a visit for visitors. I think an adult can get in for approximately £4, and if they're doing a Derry Dander, they'll get in for a discounted fee as well. So that shows the entrance, and just to the right, you see a window. And normally, what you can see in that window is a bronze cannon, and that cannon came from one of the ships of the Spanish Armada that was shipwrecked off the coast, in this case about 30 miles away in Kinnigo Bay. And the City of Derry Sub Aqua Club found the wreck and brought a lot of stuff out in the 1970s. So there's an exhibition about the Spanish Armada there, plus also an exhibition about the history of the city. And while we'll cover a lot of that in my tour, if you want to see some of the swords and cannonballs and other important things, such as the coach of the Knox family from the Half Hung McNaughton story, that's all in the Tower Museum. But if you take a look at the blue plaque just outside the Tower Museum, you will see that it remembers a lady by the name of Mabel Remington Cahoon. And Mabel would have been well known to the ladies of Kilfennan. And there's a picture of Mabel towards the end of her life. So Mabel's family was originally from Malin in County Donegal, but they moved into the city as she was born there, and she lived most of her life in Deanfield. She was a member of Great James's Street congregation, which later on became Kilfennan Presbyterian Church. She was a pioneer of Irish archaeology and local historical associations, and she travelled throughout the world getting artifacts and bringing them back for her collection. She attended and then taught at the Londonderry High School, which eventually became part of Foyle College. In 1995, through the North West Historical Association, she published a book called The Heritage of Inishowen. It's archaeology, history and folklore. And apparently there was only a very limited print run, and it sold for about a fiver. Recently somebody told me they were trying to buy it second hand on eBay, and it was being priced at over £200, and is accepted as it is the key book to read if you want to find out a lot of information about Inishowen and Donegal. And after she died, she had left a lot of artifacts, and they are in the collection and care of the Tower Museum. Most of them have never been displayed yet, so look forward to a time in the future where they all come under display. And now we've climbed up to the walls itself, and we're standing in an area known as Coward's Bastion, and we can look over and actually see the foil approximately 150 yards away, and look further down towards the Guildhall. And that is an area of reclaimed land, largely happened in the 1800s. But Coward's Bastion is called that because it was the safest place to be during the 1688-89 siege. Remember, James had an army surrounding the city, but he didn't have any ships. And the armies of King William, well, they had ships, but they were below the boom that wasn't breached until the Mountjoy in the end of July. So that was the safest place to get guard duty. Now we're going to walk along what's called really the north wall, and you see seven cannons there in front of you. And the last two I usually stop at because they're the most interesting because they date to 1590, and they have a Tudor rose on them that shows that they go back to the time of Queen Elizabeth I, who was the last Tudor monarch of Great Britain and Ireland. And you have a great view here looking at the tower of the Guildhall. So you've in that picture you have a cannon dates to 1590, a Guildhall tower that dates to about 1890, and if you look across at the Peach Bridge, that dates to 2011. And I always encourage my clients to take a picture of that because there's over 400 years of history in that one shot. But then I always tell people to have a wee look up the Guildhall and tell me what you see. And most people never really do this. And if you look at the top, you see the windbreaker um, has a golden ship at the top, and that ship represents the Mountjoy because the Mountjoy brought salvation to the city in the relief of Derry. So we're going to walk along here now and we're going to take a little look up Shipley Street, and I encourage my visitors to look at it as it is today. And then I draw their attention to a nearby storyboard. And as you can see, that is the picture taken sometime in the 1880s. And there's been relatively little change. But just at the very top, where you would have had the town hall, you now have the War Memorial that's been there since 1927. And if you just look to the bottom of the storyboard picture, you'll see where we started was really kind of where a wooden quay was when the city was first built, surrounded mainly by water, and on the west side or the right side of that picture by a bog. We've now walked round the north wall. We've gone past Water Bastion, which is the opposite side to Carriage Bastion, and we've come up to the Millennium Forum. And just at the side entrance, we see this interesting sculpture. And I always encourage people to have a walk around and tell me what it means. And rather than give you the information yourself, you're welcome to come on a tour and I'll tell you about it. No, seriously. It was put up by Anthony Gormley. There were three in the city. Anthony Gormley was an artist whose grandfather was from the city, and he is famous for uh, the Angel of the North, which is just outside Newcastle on the motorway. And it's meant to represent the two sides of Christianity, the Protestant side and the Roman Catholic side, how they're both connected to the cross, but one is facing out one way and one is facing out the other way. We've now walked on further and we're looking at the Millennium Forum. And the Millennium Forum has really been there since about 1999. Like a lot of places, they got new buildings for the Millennium. And it holds seats for about 2,000 to 3,000 people. And sometimes there's local shows and there's touring shows such as We Will Rock You. And it's the 13th theatre in the city's history. Derry has always been very famous for art and music. And the road in front of the Millennium Forum is known as Newmarket Street. And you might think, well, why am I showing you that? What's of interest there? But if you notice, there's no walls. And we always claim to be the only city in Ireland with unbroken walls. And yet there's a big gap there. But just remember that we only top sliced and removed the top slice of the walls, that they still continue underneath the road. So therefore we can say we have still an unbroken set of walls. Now just going to look at St. Colum's Hall, which is a very impressive building just to that side of the city. It was originally built in 1886 by the Roman Catholic Church as a total abstinence hall and with probably connections to the pioneer movement. It had previously been the site of the Pear Tree Inn, which had been an old bar at that time, but the Pear Tree Inn is remembered because there used to be a pear tree at that site, and it's believed that's how Lundy escaped the city by climbing down the pear tree. It's a mixture of Italian and Gothic architecture, and at the top there are statues of Temperance, Erin, and Vulcan. In 1912, as part of the suffragette campaign, Mrs. Emmeline Pankhurst addressed a rally there. It was the Guildhall had been burnt down at that stage, and other places would not give her a platform to speak. Also on the steps of it in 1924, Eamon de Valera was arrested as he came into the city to speak at a rally. It's been the home of one of the Derry fascists since 1922, and it's hosted a lot of famous musical performers over the years, including Joseph Locke, Ruby Murray, Chubby Checker, Frank Carson, Roy Orbison, Val Doonigan, Dana, Bill Coulter, Roman Downey, Fergal Sharkey, amongst many others. So now we're going to turn and we're going to continue our walk around the walls. And as you can see, you have rather a steep incline to go. But I say to people, it'll be worth it at the end, because where those people are standing in front of you, we will look back and we will see the most photographed thing currently in the city, well, at least on Instagram. And I hear lots of various answers to that. So we've now arrived and we're looking back, and this particular tourist attraction has only been there since January 2019, and it is, of course, the Derry Girls mural. And the Derry Girls is a comedy show on Channel 4. It's currently had two series, and I think a third one is either in post production or is currently underway. I have had guests on my tour from Germany, from America, who say the only reason they have stopped in the city is because of the Derry Girls. And just to show you that Northern Ireland humour is not dead, within a couple of hours of that being painted, this picture appeared also on social media. Now we're going to continue our walk around, and we've reached Ferry Quay Gate, or as they usually say in the city, Fergie Gate. And that was very important for a couple of reasons. First of all, it is the location where the apprentice boys first closed the gate on the garrison of Redshanks from Antrim that had been sent there in December 1688. So in reality, that is where the siege started. But there was kind of a phony war period until March, until King James arrived himself in March 1689, but he arrived at the Bishopsgate entrance. But just if you look closer at Fergie Gate and underneath the weeds in some of these pictures, there are actually two heads. On one side, you have the head of the Reverend Walker, who was one of the governors at the time of the siege and was Church of Ireland clergyman. On the other side, you have a Presbyterian clergyman, the Reverend James Gordon, and it's believed that he was the one that encouraged the apprentice boys to close the gates. And at the time they were refurbing that gate, they decided to keep both sides of, I suppose, the Protestant community happy with a head for both clergymen. As we walk up the walls, we will see one of the few original Banksies outside of England. I sense you don't believe me, and you're quite right. In fact, it's just a stencil on the wall. If that had been a Banksy, there would have been a big glass case around it, and the house itself that it's painted on would have been worth more. But I think it's quite an interesting thing to see. And that is just opposite the entrance to the playhouse. And if you just look above the entrance, you will see an inscription in Gaelic, and it's very old-fashioned Gaelic, and it refers to the fact that that used to be a convent of the Sisters of Mercy. And there were a number of schools had their formation there, including Thornhill and St Colum's College. And I had a few ladies from Thornhill out on one of my tours last year, and they talked about how there were some parts of that building they were scared to go into because there was always the rumour of a wee nun that haunted it. If you look closely at the entrance, you will see there's a cobbled entrance, and there's actually two buildings there. There's a courtyard in the middle and another building behind. And so it's got a cobbled entrance, you might say. What's so special about that? Well, they're actually wooden cobbles. And there are only two places in Ireland have wooden cobbles at their entrance. One is there, and the other is Trinity College in Dublin. And why are they wooden cobbles? Well, the story is that they were there to deaden the sound of the horses' hooves who were going into the courtyard, because the nuns were at prayer in the convent, and the children were also studying in the school. And if you go on through to the courtyard, you will see this dairy cow, as they say, that was there from the City of Culture in 2013. There's approximately about 12 of them scattered throughout the city, representing different arts, and that's the one that was representing drama that's in the playhouse. We're going to continue our walk around the walls, and the next building of note we're coming to see is St Colum's Cathedral, and that is the oldest surviving building in the city, built between 1626 and 1633 for use of the planters who'd come to the city. The spire that you will see is not part of the original building. Originally, there had been no spire, and at the time of the Great Siege, cannons had been located on the top of the tower because the cathedral also acted as the headquarters of the city because the town hall had been destroyed. Now, our tour today does not allow us to do a lot of detail about St Colum's Cathedral, but it would be one of my top 3 places to visit when you're next in the city and get a chance to go inside, not just for the exterior and the fact that it's a wonderful old church. There's also a fantastic museum called the Chapter House Museum that has a lot of interesting information in it. And there's a few reprobates from Kilfennan Presbyterian Church Men's Group who came out on a tour with me in February 2019. And they're pictured in front of the gates that were a gift from the Honourable the Irish Society in 1933 to remember the 300th anniversary of the completion of the cathedral. But just on the subject of restoration, in the Chapter House Museum, you have pictures of Cecil Frances Alexander, the famous hymn writer, and her husband, Bishop William Alexander, who may have been the first Derryman to have become the Bishop of Derry and then eventually the Archbishop of Armagh. And you can see that shows what the pictures originally looked like and some of the interim steps to what they currently look like now. And now we find ourselves in the diamond. And I just thought it'd be interesting to show you some pictures of the diamond through the ages. And there you have it in approximately around about the 1880s, where you see the town hall over to the right, the Guildhall spire very much still in the distance. And if we go to the 1920s, at least before 1927, there is what was a garden in the centre of the diamond where the town hall used to be, which has now been replaced by the Guildhall. And there it is in the 1950s during a bit of a snowstorm, and you can just see the Guildhall in the distance further down Shipgate Street. And that's it more or less in the current day, with the department store of Austin's, which historically was one of the very first department stores anywhere in the world. But we're going to focus our attention on the War Memorial. And the War Memorial structure of it is you have the goddess of victory at the top, and you have an infantryman on this side and a sailor on the other side. And if you look closely at the sailor's cap, it says HMS Derry on it. So it was unveiled on the 23rd of June 1926 and is designed by Vernon March. There's a story that it was originally designed for the city of Sheffield, but the inhabitants of there thought it looked a bit too scary, and so it then came to Derry. But I've had it in good authority that that's not a true story. But the actual miniatures that were used in the competition for the design of it are actually in the Chapter House Museum in St Columb's Cathedral. It honours the dead of both World War I and World War II. There are 756 names on it from World War I, though possibly over 1,150 people would have died from the city in the Great War, but some of them didn't make it onto the actual City War Memorial, and they might be named on individual church war memorials. There are 52% of the names are from a Protestant background and 48% are from a Roman Catholic background. So the War Memorial is definitely part of our shared heritage in the city. There are 755 men named on it, but only one woman. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that woman. And she was Miss Laura Gailey. So this picture of a war memorial is the one actually in Kilfennan Presbyterian Church and would have came from Great James's Street Church. And if you just look up to the top right, you will see the name of Laura Gailey. And Laura was a nurse during the First World War. Unfortunately, she died of pneumonia while treating troops in Liverpool in 1917. In recent years, a headstone was erected in her memory, and it was funded through one of the Women's Orange Lodges from the city. Now, there will be more information about Laura Gailey at the end, but again, I think the critical thing is that she was a member of Great James's Street Church, which therefore became Kilfennan Church. So she's an important Presbyterian lady connected to the Kilfennan congregation. Finally, I would normally take any questions or feedback, and if you've enjoyed this virtual tour, why not think about booking a real tour with Derry Danders once it is safe and we're free to do so. But just before I conclude with a short video, and there's a still from the video, and there's a film on YouTube about Laura Gailey. Otherwise, thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.
Nurse, help me, nurse. Christ, save me, nurse.
Please, call me Laura, if that helps give you a better feeling.
Volunteer nurse Laura Marion Gailey died on the 24th of March 1917, aged 28.
It feels ever so strange to find myself here, back home in Derry. And ever so strange to find my city so different. My home is now a place of business. Cambridge, an accountancy firm. Who is here to count our dead? Where is my family? My mother, my sweet sister Jeannie. It's not that I so desperately need to see my name, not that I am so special and must be remembered by the city. I only want to see how my own family remembered me. My father was an elder in Great James's Street. Like him, I am a unionist and therefore opposed Home Rule. I too signed the Declaration, as did so many of my friends. Our nearby church in Great James's Street was where my father and mother, my sisters and brothers attended dutifully to worship. It's now a bazaar, a glassworks, a place of bedlam. My father's shop in Waterloo Place, does that still exist? What's this? After the Holocaust of the war, all cities and towns and villages must have created their own war memorials. Maybe there is one war memorial in the centre of our town. Maybe my name is there.